Thank you for listening to Mormon Sex Info. This episode is an archived episode and is only now becoming publicly available. Mormon Sex Info relies on contributions. To contribute, please visit mormonsex.info. And now, please enjoy this episode.
Hello and welcome to a co-production between Mormon Sex Info and Mormon Mental Health Podcasts. This is Natasha Parker. I am so excited about today's interview, and I'm going to tell you about why in just a minute. But before I do, I want to thank all of those who subscribe to Mormon Sex Info. I so appreciate you being willing to do that. I hope you're finding the content super valuable. I try to bring on really valuable guests, so thank you for that. And for those of you who are listening from the Mormon Mental Health Podcast side of things, again, if you're a donor, thank you so much for being willing to do that. The Mormon Mental Health Podcast is only going to be in production past 2018 if it can become financially sustainable. And so I am asking for donations. Any little bit will do. And I so appreciate those who are willing to support me in this way because I love doing it. It's kind of a self-calling, I guess, that I've given to myself. and I love producing these podcasts. I think I get oftentimes really great feedback, and I think they're helpful for people in regards to lots of topics that oftentimes can be taboo, lots of topics that people may feel isolated on or don't understand or have some misinformation on. So anytime that we can educate and bring either professionals or individuals on to help shed some light on some of these topics and issues, it's I think phenomenal. So please consider continuing a donation. As far as upcoming events, I just want people to be aware that I will be back in Utah with Dan Witherspoon the weekend of October 12th through 14th for a Mormon Matters retreat. These are great events to support people going through faith transitions, maybe find themselves in a mixed faith relationship, marriage, trying to raise kids in a nuanced way within Mormonism, anything that has to do with trying to either live in a nuanced or transitioned way from Mormonism. These are great events to support you in that. So go to mormonmatters.org or my page at natashaparker.org for more information on that. Yeah, so without further ado, I'm going to tell you who I have on my show today. So I've been trying to get Melissa to come on my show pretty much since I started. She's a dear friend, and we go back a long time. Back, probably 20 years. How old are our kids? Our kids are almost 20 years old. So yeah,
almost 20.
Before babies, we had babies together. And I will be just very upfront and saying right from the get-go that Melissa and her husband at the time were paramount in helping me, although I think they were looking for my help, but really in helping me be much more mindful and thoughtful about the issues around LGB members in our church, specifically gay men, lesbian women, and in particular mixed orientation marriages, which is what they found themselves in at the time that we knew each other, even though at the time, I guess when we first met Melissa, this wasn't something you were aware of at the time. So I was one of the people that they reached out to when they were discussing those things. And we're here to talk about your story, Melissa, and tell us all about kind of the things that you went through and the things that you learned along the way. And I feel like in a lot of ways, we learned a lot together. So I just want to say right off from the because there wasn't a lot in my professional background that really taught me a lot about this. I wasn't a sex therapist at the time, and I had my own, biases and things as a Mormon mental health professional myself, and there wasn't that much really on this in regards to my training. And so there we go. So hello, Melissa. Welcome to the show.
Hello. Thank you, Natasha.
I guess where I'd like to start is just to introduce yourself. What's your background? Where do you come from? What type of Mormon upbringing do you come from? Kind of set up for how you and Richard get married, etc.
Okay. So typical Mormon, Salt Lake City Mormon, family of 5, 4 siblings, very devout Mormon family. My dad was a bishop. we lived Mormonism to, its fullest. Our lives revolved around the church and our community, and most of which were in the church. And Richard's family, same deal, 8 kids, very entrenched in, Mormon tradition. He went on a mission for 2 years, and, the whole, very devoted. We got married when I was 26. He was 33. He was living in LA. And during that time when he was living in LA, he was going to graduate school. But I think if you ask Richard, he knew he was gay as a young child. If you had to pinpoint it, he would say by 5 or 6 or 7, he knew he was gay. But as most of the people listening know, there are no gay Mormons. So he went through the course of Mormonism and the priesthood, all the ordinations and the designations that you do as a young man, and just kind of, brushed that aside, with the expectation of, it's, I guess, going to go away. When you get married, it's going to go away, or, if you go on a mission, these feelings will go away. And so he just, proceeded like that. By the time we got married, I was 26, he was 33. He had some gay experiences, but the majority of his love experiences had been with women, none sexual, but definitely, dating, serious girlfriends, possible marriage talk, that sort of thing. So the setup is, before we were married, well, I went to a women's college, so I was super open to, part of my education was LGBT and being very accepting of, lesbian, bisexual, and Richard, I think he really thought when we got married that he was bisexual, that he was attracted to men, but that maybe he knew he was gay. I guess he knew he was gay, but he wanted to hope that he could be bisexual and marry a woman and continue with his lifestyle, being a Mormon and getting married in the temple and having an eternal family and all those things that you're promised as a tiny little tot in primary. That's what we were going for. Families can be together forever.
Can you tell me the time frame of this a bit? Like, when were you guys going to college and when were you getting married? What years were this?
Okay, so I graduated from college in 1991 at a women's college in Massachusetts called Mount Holyoke, and he was graduating from graduate school at UCLA right about the same time. And then I lived in Salt Lake for a few years after college, and he was in LA working after graduate school. So in 1996, we met in 1994, and we were married in 1995. Yeah. And so we had trouble getting the temple recommend because Richard was honest with the church leaders. Our marriage was postponed. He had a job in France at the time, and we were trying to get married and move to France. And our marriage was postponed in the temple because he disclosed that he had sexual relations with men.
Did he disclose that to you as well, or only in the spaces?
He did disclose that to me as well. So, because of part of my education was, I was very open, and I just believed that, okay, that's fine, but as long as you're attracted to me and you want to live this lifestyle that we're embarking on, we're going to be Mormons, we're going to get married in the temple, we're starting an eternal family, we're going to have kids, we're going to enjoy all those, benefits of being a Mormon that we have, we believe in and adhere to and want to be in the community of our families. That's what all of our siblings were doing at the time, and our parents. And of course you want to be, accepted into that family, not only your church community, but your family community. So we got married. We worked through that whole process with a stake president in Salt Lake City, and we were finally given the green light. And we were married.
And did you have concerns
And
at this point as far as his attraction towards
I did not have concerns. Now, you know, throw in a little life experience, and I should have had concerns. But when you are a female, a young, you know, you're in your mid-20s and you've never had you don't have any sexual experience yourself, you don't, you know, what do you know? I didn't know what was normal. I had some boyfriends and you know, but beyond making out and some heavy petting, you know, that was like my experience at that point. Heavy petting, by the way, is such a great Mormon term. I don't know that any other group uses that phrase. Maybe they do. You'd have to tell me.
I have heard it elsewhere, believe it or not.
You have? Wow. It's so, I cringe when I hear that term. But I abstained from, Richard and I did not go there before we were married. We did not have sex before we were married. Right. And so I just thought, well, he's just super disciplined. You know, he must be sick, because I felt like I was having a harder time than he was. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then very quickly into the marriage, after the honeymoon and you know, the first, even just like the first month of marriage, sexual frequency dropped way down. But life was good. You know, it was a new marriage, and, you know, you just got married for time and all eternity, and he was a good man, and we were best friends, and life was good. We lived in Europe. We traveled all over. It was such a wonderful time. But there was this really, for me, very difficult piece of my marriage that I brushed that aside, because what are you going to do with that? But, you know, you can always work on it. I always held this hope that it was going to get better, or it was going to be more frequent, or, you know, it just didn't live up to my girlhood dreams of it, or like when you read what you read about in magazines, or you hear other women talking about and that are the same age, or other friends that you have that are married, and they talk about their, you know, little snippets about their sex life, and mine didn't measure up. And I knew it. I mean, I knew it before even comparing notes to anyone. It wasn't nothing, but it was very infrequent. And it was more like these are Richard's words, and we talk about all this. We have talked about this. You know, we did, of course, a lot when he came out. But and this is really sad and really funny at the same time, but he described the frequency of our sex life as it was like mowing the lawn. You got to do it once a week, and you know, to keep it, or, you know, if things are, you can't. It's just one of those tasks you have to do. You don't want to do it, but you got to do it. But you're glad you did it when it's done, right? So that was, in a nutshell, that was our sex life.
And
but he was we were affectionate, though. We held hands at movies. We hugged. We kissed. You know, it was an affectionate. It's not like I was, you know, starved for affection. We were affectionate. We snuggled at night. You know, things like that. But it's not like it wasn't hot and steamy sex life.
And prior to him coming out, were you talking about this at all, as far as the frequency?
So when you know there's a problem, and you just, you know, deep down at your very deepest core, there's a bigger problem there. And of course, in the back of my mind, I knew what he had told me before we got married. But as a Mormon, you think, but we're married, and so we're not, you know, he's not gay, right? We just have some dysfunction in our sex life that we can always work on. But as we kind of worked through our marriage, so, you know, 4 years in, we had our first baby, and then I had some infertility issues, and then 5.5 years later, we had the second baby, And then 2 years later, we had third baby. So 3 boys. And the second boy, the last anniversary, Richard came out to me finally. And our youngest was 1-year-old. And during that last year, from the birth of okay, so let me just back up a little longer. We had some pretty severe infertility issues. So we did the full gamut. For about 5 years, we did infertility treatments. And I had some autoimmune disorders, and so there's all kinds of, not just infertility treatment, but autoimmune suppressant treatments. And so sex was about the last thing on my mind. I was all about having babies, had little children, needing more babies, breastfeeding. Sex was just so not what I was missing at that point. So, but then fast forward a little, Oliver's born in 2006, and I, lose all the baby weight, and I start running again, and I'm ready to kind of reclaim that piece, or I'm ready to figure out what's missing in my sex life. So I start, looking at Cosmo magazine or whatever, and it's like, try this, those silly little, lust, sex, little snippets in the back of that magazine.
Right.
And we were, at this point, we were going on trips, we were traveling. Richard was successful in his career. Life was really good. I had 3 babies. We felt like we had won the lottery because we struggled so hard with the fertility issues, and life was really good. I was on a high. And then, so I would, we were on a trip in particular. We were in Vegas. We had this beautiful hotel room, and I was feeling good about myself, and, finally not breastfeeding or pregnant, or, healing from a scar or a wound. And so I was ready to reclaim that, or revisit that part of our marriage, the sexual piece of our marriage that was just completely lacking at that point. And so we tried, we tried, but at that point he really just was not into it. He wasn't, and I was pushing. I was pushing it. I wanted that piece back. And now that kids were out of, the physical part of having kids, in terms of, my part, having babies was over, I started pushing, and that's really what pushed his coming out to the forefront. He told me on our 12th anniversary, we went out for dinner, we came home, and he said, I can't go another day living this lie. I have to tell you that at that point, he traveled a lot for work, and he had some sexual, at this point he had a lover, and he told me that I have to hand it to Richard. I love that he didn't tell me right out that he was gay, and that because he was gay, he cheated on me. He came out and said, I have been unfaithful to you. And when I look back on that, I'm so glad he chose those words instead of the other words, because if you say I'm gay, therefore I cheated, he said I cheated, and then he told me he was gay.
Why was that?
Just because I think it's easy to explain it's easy to blame. I would have never cheated, but I'm gay, so that's why I cheated. It's significant because he was owning up to me that our marriage was a real marriage, and he loved me, but he cheated on me.
In other words,
and he was owning first that he cheated on me. He was taking responsibility. He knew this was going to crush me and hurt me so bad, beyond him telling me he was gay. The fact that he cheated on me was going to be more painful for me. And so he owned that one first. So that was a super, super hard night to hear that not only did you was your spouse cheating or, having extracurricular affairs. But then double whammy that it's with men.
And if you're comfortable.
And triple whammy, I have a boyfriend.
Right.
But he didn't tell me on that same night. I didn't get the number 3 news until later. So that's how it came out.
Can you speak to all of this time up until that coming out moment? What are both of your relationships with the church?
Good question. So I was a dutiful wife, and we dutifully took our 3 children to church every single week. We were very active. Richard, at the time of his coming out, was the first counselor in the bishopric. He was a rising star. He's just one of those types. Whatever organization he's in, his organizational skills, executive planning, he just rises to the top. Where whether it's in business or at church or in any informal group, people defer to him. He knows how to run a meeting. He knows how to get things done. He's that guy. His leadership skills are a 10. So he was in the church leadership. I think he had been executive to the bishop or executive secretary to the bishop for many years. I don't even know if they have that calling anymore. Young men's president, possibly in their, various callings. And then he was the first counselor to the bishop when he came out. And I remember it was Saturday night when he came out. And I remember looking at the clock and it was like 3 a.m. and we were still, up at it. And I remember saying, well, I guess we're not going to church then, are we? And it was like the first time we had gone to church other than kids throwing up and being sick. He would go to church he would leave the house at 5:30 a.m. every Sunday, drive half hour to get to his 6 a.m. meetings. And then I would get up and wrestle all those boys into their little church outfits and drive to church with sweat running down my back, and every Sunday alone, getting those kids ready for church. And it was at this point, Ian was so he didn't want to go. It was just a fight every Sunday morning. Anyway, we were dutiful. I don't remember what my calling was. I remember I was a teacher. I was a teacher in the Relief Society. Mm-hmm. Just once a month. Like I was just, one of the teachers. And I remember the day. So Richard quit the next day. He went to the bishop and told him.
The very next day. And if not the next day, I think it was the next day because we got a babysitter. Maybe it was just that week because the bishops do they do interviews like one night a week or something, or they did it. Because I remember we got a babysitter, and I went to the bishop with him, and we told the bishop, and then they called a court. Bishop's court. I know they don't call it Bishop's court anymore because it sounds like a judgment, but it is. But anyway, he was excommunicated immediately. I also went to that meeting. And then right after that meeting, I went and taught my Relief Society lesson. Like that's the kind of, Wow.
And for a year after his excommunication, we took our boys to church. And then they started asking, why can't Dad take the sacrament? Why isn't Dad taking the sacrament? Why isn't Dad up on the stand anymore? Why isn't Dad, why is Dad going to church with us? It's so funny because it's supposed to be a thing that you go to with your family, but we never went as a family. And so when we finally did, it was go to church as a family. It was because he was excommunicated. And then we took our kids to church. We were both just reeling from the impact of the admission that, okay, Richard is out. There is a man in his life and he's gay. Keep our act together. We're trying not to lose it. It was both of us were under a great deal of pressure.
Right.
And so we wanted to keep at least that normal for our kids. I mean, our kids didn't know anything. They just thought life was normal, I think. But it was about that time where the church leadership really started coming out swinging on their language about homosexuality.
So what years are we talking about right now?
So it was probably 2 years. So he came out in 2007, and this was probably like in 2009.
Okay.
So this is terrible. But we would take our kids to church, and Richard was getting so he could barely like hack it, and I was having a hard time with it. And we would take our kids to church and then go to sacrament meeting, and then we would go like to Target or and leave our kids at church, and then come back and get them. It just became really difficult to sit through. You just start slowly processing what this all means, and you start figuring out we're not really relevant. We're not really irrelevant. This religion is becoming less relevant to our lives, and the language that's coming out. We still were taking the church news and the what is the ensign,
right?
And these our kids are now like, okay, take a topic from the a lot of the sacrament meetings. They started having kids that are giving talks in sacrament meetings take a talk from one of the apostles and summarize it and give a talk on that talk, right? Well, so there's talks about how homosexuality is bad and evil and unnatural, and I forget, there's several of them that came out with pretty awful language. And we're sitting there with our children and wondering, oh my gosh, how are we going to, we're going to really mess up our kids if we make them go to this church that teaches that their dad is like this unnatural, evil guy, that his natural sexuality is a sin against God and the church and not to be tolerated. And so as those years went on, there was a couple of years where we kept going, and then it would just become, we couldn't take it anymore. The hypocrisy of it, of us taking our kids to a church that teaches that their dad is a bad guy. And everything that I knew to be true, even though, he broke my heart, and I, little by little, was realizing I don't know if I want to stay in this marriage because I want a full life. But, bit by bit, we withdrew.
So
because it was so uncomfortable.
Right, because of all the rhetoric that you were hearing there. Let's go back to, the coming out process and just your marriage. So, in other words, you say there was like this huge, it wasn't just one disclosure, right? It was several disclosures that were really very profound, right? As far as
yes.
How do you, and you go to the bishop, and there's church discipline. So walk me through a little bit of just how you and Richard as a couple start dealing or talking or trying to address these concerns. Like, why aren't you kicking him out on the street that same night? Or like, what's happening between the two of you?
So Richard and I decided, well, first of all, when he told me, I don't know why, he was ready to go. He was expecting I would say, leave, go get out of the house. And I, as I look back, that wasn't even an option on the table. It's not like I was deciding what should I do. I mean, I have a 1-year-old baby. I'm like, no, you're not leaving because the first thing on my mind is we have to take care of these kids. I've just been mortally wounded, but I can't, it just wasn't even on the table, like that he would leave for me. It wasn't even a choice or an option at that point. And so we decided, and this is mostly Richard, and I agreed and bought in because I could see that it was, there are kids involved. It's not just me and Richard. There are children involved. And so you can't fly off the handle. And in this situation, once you say it, once it's out, you can never take it back. So we were still in maybe, the first stage was, maybe we can make this work. You get rid of your boyfriend and we'll just do therapy. We were already in therapy. The day after he told me, we went to a therapist, and she was amazing. And she saved me. You saved me too, Natasha, but I didn't tell you for 2 weeks, as I recall. And Richard and I decided that together as well. We came to, I'll get to that. But we decided from the get-go, like that night, okay, we have a huge crisis on our hands. And this could be a real shit show, right? I mean, think of it just in terms of, okay, your intimate little family, the 5 of us. Then there's our extended families. Then there's our community. There's our ward community. There's his work. There's so much at stake. Like we really have to control the flow of information, and because otherwise we lose control. And we have to control this process because it's going to be a process. So we decided that we do nothing rash. Like nothing is just, obviously everyone's hurting here, but nothing rash. That was rule number 1. We are going to, every step we take is going to be carefully thought out with thinking of the children and everyone's individual needs and the common good here. And so nothing rash. And that one rule honestly made me do so many smart things, or, make so many decisions in the right timing, I believe. That was just a lifesaver. And the other thing was, we said everything, and this is a little corny, but everything we do, every decision we make, every action, love has to be the guide. And, I really pushed myself on that one. I think we both did, but just every decision has to have that overlay. And the other one is we are no fear, of, which is super hard, of the usual stuff, like what people are going to say, what people are going to do. We got to have, so no fear, love always, and nothing rash. Those were our 3 main guidelines.
Wow.
And I just think, and we wrote them down and agreed upon that we would adhere to those basic guidelines. And I believe it was just, I think if I would have just, called my parents in tears the next day, it would have been a nightmare, because then all the rescuers would have flown in trying to manage the situation. And, because I was really a wreck for a while, and I probably would have let it happen. And it would have had a very different outcome, I believe. So
you purposefully did not reach out to family members at that point?
No. Natasha, I reached out to you before. You were so it was me and Richard and this therapist in downtown Chicago. And then 2 weeks later, I remember Richard was I think he was on a business trip, and if I'm recalling right, it was like in the fall, and you lived in Milwaukee, and Richard called me on a business trip, and he said, I've been thinking, and he said, I really think you need someone else in because Richard has a cousin who he confided in. So Richard had a cousin, a really close cousin. They were, basically raised as brothers. who he confided in, and I was talking to as well, because he's loved by both of us, and he loves both of us, and he was a huge help. And we're both still very close to him, and I'll always be forever in his debt. But Richard called me and he said, I really think you need someone who's just for you, and you can tell who you want. It could be your sister, it could be your parents, but the name that pops into my head is Natasha. And Natasha, it's so weird. I had been thinking that same thing that same day. Like, I need someone. Who can I tell? I'm not telling my family, not ready to go there, because how that can, I love my family, and I know, but eventually that, you can't take it back once you say it. And so I needed to tell somebody that wasn't in my family, but that understood the Mormon background, that had a little, you had your master's in social work, and you were working, and I don't know, you just were the obvious choice. Plus you were just a car ride away. And then up in Milwaukee, and I remember, I called you up and you said, yeah, come on up. And we, I don't know, spent like 5 hours in my car.
Well, can I give some details about that? You called me up bawling, which had never happened before in our friendship. And you told me that you could not tell me what was wrong over the phone. And so could you come up? So I spent the next 2.5 hours like going a little bit nutty, as far as like what's coming at me wrong. That not so much what was coming at me, but just so concerned for you, and do you want to hear what I really thought?
You thought it was an affair with a woman?
I thought you were the one that had an affair.
Oh! Me?
And do you want to know why? Like, this is like, because I'm thinking, like, what could be so awful that she can't tell me over the phone? We were dear friends with both. I love Richard, right? So this is Richard. Out of the two of you, always seemed like the more rigid, kind of super follow the rules type of guy, which is kind of like, now that I know so much more about especially gay male members in the church, so many of them, I think, go into that extra perfectionistic type of mode, right? Like, I'm going to pray away. I'm going to do everything right. I'm going to do everything I need to do to make sure that this is something that
doesn't get out of hand.
Or that the Lord can bless me, because blessings are so equational in our church, right? And so the Lord
if I just work extra hard, I won't want to have sex with men.
We'd had conversations about Mormon doctrine and polygamy and things, and you were always the more open-minded kind of
the one I know.
Like able to talk about things kind of from different perspectives, and Richard was always the one that was like, no, this is the way it is, and kind of, so I did not ever think
that is true at that time. I mean, at that time, now, obviously things have changed, but definitely.
Right. And so and not that I would have thought that of you necessarily either, but I thought between the two of you.
Right.
He's done something.
That is funny. Like, it wouldn't be Richard. No, it must be Melissa. That's good.
All right.
That's funny.
My little confession of what I was thinking. But
it makes sense. That's the kind of, Richard's such a great guy. He is, and he was, and there's just no way. That's the thing is, that's how I felt. I was like, there is no way. Like, that's why it was, such a shock that the infidelity thing was more of a shock than the homosexuality thing.
Well, and I just want
to, just like, there's no way.
Your marriage was lovely. I mean,
it was.
He doted on you.
In fact, people would say to me, you guys are so much fun. You guys do so many fun things. You guys like really like actually love each other and love being together.
Right. So yes, I wouldn't have imagined he would have, and I would never have imagined him having an affair with a woman, because that would have been in competition with you, right? Like, this is very different what ended up happening. So again, not to, like, to your point, kind of his infidelity choice, and at the same time, if he would have been a heterosexual and you would have had the marriage that you had, there was really he loved you so much, he loves you still, I know. So that's not, I don't know. You had a wonderful marriage together in many, many aspects.
We did. And that was, lots of people ask me, how did you not know? How did you? And it's just, well, because we had, why were you not, happy? Or, how could you? I don't know, because there were so many great things about our relationship. So many great things, like you said, so many great things about our marriage and our friendship. And there was happiness, and there was security, and there was fun. I was happy. I was not unhappy.
Yeah.
There was just, I was, and also I just held on to this hope that, it was going to change, or I could work on it. We can work on this. We can do therapy. There's so many things we can do.
Right.
And so the crushing thing about the coming out was that then that hope was taken from me. So you can function in a marriage when you have hope that something's going to get better, or something that can be worked on. But it becomes really difficult when that hope is taken away. And that's one thing that the therapist that we used, that was the hard lesson I learned from her, is that now that hope is gone. Yes, you can, stay married, but your marriage is never going to be what you want it to be. And that was staggering, that realization. That took me a long time. And in fact, I was mad at her for saying that for a long time, only because I knew it was true at the time, but just couldn't face it, couldn't accept it. But I knew it was true when she said it.
Yeah, and can you talk a little bit about that? Because I remember that was the number one question that you gave me in the car that night when we spent 5 hours together, is you just kind of over and over just asked me, is there any hope? Like, can we make this work? Even though, okay, is there any that we could stay?
Yeah.
And I will be very frank about where I was at in my professional life, and I don't particularly remember what I told you, but I remember thinking, I'm not sure. I don't know that I know enough about this, either from a sexual perspective or even just, an LG perspective.
Right.
And I don't know, but I will say that, my Mormonism definitely kicked in. Like, my Mormon bias kicked in. Like, there's got to be a way.
Yeah.
There's got to be a way. They're a beautiful couple.
No,
and there's the gospel, right? And I'm sure there's got to be something. And so I don't know if I was very helpful to you in that regard.
No, you were, and I remember what you said. But let me just first, the topic of, well, yes, you can, because there's the gospel, and you're married for time and all eternity. So of course it's going to work, because you have this power. Your marriage has this extra added power from the, bestowed upon you by the powers of the priesthood of the church, or the sacred ordinance in the temple. Of course it can work. And so, you believe that. One of the staggering things about Richard coming out and then losing that hope about the marriage is that, now not only am I screwed over in this life, like my marriage is all screwed over in this life, now I'm screwed over in the next life too. So it was like double whammy. It's one of the main things that you're taught as a little tiny tyke in primary, that your marriage, your family is forever, and the way it is. And then to realize that, holy crap, my marriage is not going to work here, and not going to work there either. So now what? Now I'm just this hanging, free floating being, not attached to anyone. It's so terrifying. And maybe that's, I mean, it's just, it's terrifying. That was absolutely psychologically terrifying to me. Like, I was messed up over that for a while. And then you start, over time, just bit by bit, day by day, realizing, well, maybe I'd be okay. Maybe life can still be good. Maybe my hereafter, my eternal life can still be good without this marriage. Maybe, just maybe, it's not just as we think. And you start, that starts entering your mind and kind of assuaging your fears a bit. But back to what you said, Natasha. I remember in the car asking you, can this work? Could we pull this off? Could we somehow maintain the marriage and our family and our lifestyle and just manage it? And, you said, you weren't like, oh, for sure, it's absolutely, it happens all the time. I mean, you did admit, I don't know of any, I don't know of anyone, because people obviously aren't talking about this topic, or weren't at the time, but anything is possible. And yes, I think it is possible. So I remember you saying that, and that was a comfort to me at the time. And, I needed to believe that at that time. You can't just accept it all at once, all those things. It took years to process.
Right.
And it took years to process. But at that point, that's what I needed to hear. I had already heard that maybe the sexuality part is not going to work. But, the therapist that we were using at the time said people have all kinds of marriages, all kinds of relationships. And it's not always all about the sex, or even, there's all kinds of love. There's all kinds of relationships. And you have to decide what you want for your lives and your marriage and you guys have to decide that. But all kinds of relationships exist.
Yeah.
And so
I remember you telling
that
me.
I kind of used that as my framework for a while.
Mm-hmm. So can we go into, let's dive right into this next part, which is, and again, this was my bias at the time. Like, I felt at the time, and imagine the privilege that I had at the time. So this is where I just really want to confess, because I'm heterosexually married and I'm enjoying, I think, a fairly good sex life.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking at the time, well, they have so much. I don't think I ever said this to you, okay? But this is kind of where I was coming from. They have so much. They're so blessed in so many ways. Is sex really that important? Why do they have to separate just because of sex? So again, this is my pre-sex therapy self, but I'm still a therapist. I just want to point out, right, like how so many mental health professionals can still have a lot of biases. And I definitely have bias. I definitely want to own up to that. And I think it was really interesting. There were two things that were really interesting, I think it was conversations actually with Richard that helped me kind of click away from that kind of thinking. Like, first of all, I think I said something to you about, well, is the sex piece that important to him or to you? And you said something like, being gay is so much more than just the sex piece. It's like you really started cluing me into this identity that is so much more about his identity. And so that was a click moment for me. And then another moment for me was, I think that, again, I was coming at it from this perspective of, well, so Mormon, right? So Mormon bias, thinking that, well, in the afterlife, if they want to still be together, I'm sure that Heavenly Father will take this away from him, right? Will take away this struggle from him. That's where I was coming from.
Right.
And Richard straight in the face and said, what if I like myself the way I am? What if I don't want to? And for the first time, Melissa, now granted, this is in the 90s. So I give myself a little bit of grace, but it's so embarrassing really to admit all of this, is that for the first time, Richard made my head click that, why is heterosexuality the norm? Why is that the ideal? Why do we all have to be that way? Like, actually, there may be people that don't want to be heterosexual. That was
right.
like a new idea to me.
Yeah. Right. No, I know. And I have to say that I had a lot of biases too on homosexuality. And I had to abandon my own little biases. Like one in particular was that, well, I'm just going to be abandoned. I'm going to be, because that's what all gay men do. They come out and then they leave. Because I had gone online. There's not, at the time, not a lot of info, just a lot of angry women on the internet that were married to men and their husbands came out and left them. Right? So I'm thinking, well, that's just what's going to happen. That's what's going to happen to me. And, I had that bias that he was just going to go off into this big gay lifestyle and engage in dangerous behavior and get a disease and leave me high and dry. And that is not what happened at all, but I had to bit by bit get rid of that bias, get rid of, well, that's what they do, or that's what happens, or this is how they feel, or you don't know. Richard did really teach me a lot too. No, God, I believe God made me this way. So I don't want it to, like your conversation with him. I don't want this taken from me. This is who I am, and it's part of my soul, and it's part of my identity, and I do believe that. I absolutely believe that you're born with that in your soul, in your whole, it's your being, it's your spirit. I believe your spirit is homosexual or heterosexual, not just male and female,
And I also think it's this idea that sex shouldn't be important when sex is really, for most people, a huge piece of quality of life. And I think, again, that religious bias, it's almost like it's this, it's this byproduct that, again, the eternal reward is more important than sex in this life, or that you shouldn't prioritize that so much. That's more the natural man that would want to prioritize that, versus really seeing it as an integral part of wellness and health and lifestyle, just kind of romantic and marital relationships.
Yes, I agree. I think at first I would have said, because of the marriage I was in, that it wasn't a big piece of a relationship. Other issues are more important. But now I absolutely don't believe it. It's a huge piece. It's attraction and sexuality. It's a huge piece. I mean, and the other things are still important. It's part of the package. It's part of the whole package. But I don't want to put a percentage on it, but it's big. It's a big deal. And I tried to convince myself that it wasn't a big deal, that I could live without, that I could do without, because I had all these other really great things. And you were with me again, honestly, the day that I decided, or it was just, becoming just on the forefront of my mind. And you brought the kids up from, I think you were in Kansas at that point, and you came up. You were driving through Chicago to go visit Janelle.
Yeah. Probably.
And stayed a few days with me. And you were the first person, I think Richard and I had talked, well, I don't even know that we had, but you were the first person that I admitted to that, maybe this isn't good enough for me. I'm 39 years old, and maybe I want more. Maybe there's someone out there for me. And again, this other therapist that we used, I remember she was in the penthouse of this building overlooking she had a lake view and then a city view. And I remember in several sessions, she would say, Melissa, look out there. It's a big world out there. And you are an attractive woman in her, there are many men out there that would love to get to know you. And I mean, she was trying to open my eyes to it. She was very good at not pushing me any other way, but she was showing me the possibilities.
Right.
There are many men that you could date and fall in love with and have a wonderful relationship with. And you can absolutely have that. And you deserve that if that's what you want. And yeah, you look out there in that big, beautiful city and you start wondering, is there something better, better out there? Not better, but just different. I want more. There's something more out there.
Yeah.
Could it be? And you start wondering.
Well, and I remember it was on that same trip that we went to the playground together with all the kids, and one of your neighbors, who I think was also going through a divorce at the time, you had a flirtatious conversation. I could see kind of this between the two of you, and I was like, ooh, this is exciting.
And I had just told you on my sofa while the kids were all playing, I had just told you that I was open to, I maybe wanted something more. And then we went to the park of all places. And and I dated that guy for 4 years. No, he wasn't the one for me in the end, but, that is funny. This how intertwined the story is with you, Natasha.
I love it. It's been such an honor, Melissa, but I wonder how comfortable, I don't want to push you too much as far as, private matters, but how comfortable you might be expressing, what was it like for you growing up Mormon, being, pretty much having the rhetoric that most Mormon women that we got, right, which is we're kind of the gatekeepers of sexuality and sex is between man and woman, but we're not really treated like sexual creatures ourselves oftentimes. And then now, like intentionally moving into this space where you were going to choose your sexuality, choose this type of energy with yourself and another person who met you where you were at, from that heterosexual space. What did you find out about sex? What did you find out about sexuality? What did you find out about your own desires and your own, how that was tied into your identity as well, not just Richard and his gayness?
Well, I remember laughing the first time, laughing and then crying. And I think he thought I was crazy because I finally got what all the fuss was about. Why so many people do so many stupid things for sex and relationships and make so many bad decisions or take crazy risks. I finally understood what all the fuss was about. And it was mind-blowing. It was absolutely mind-blowing. And I was mad and ecstatic at the same time that I had been missing out, all these years on that chemistry piece. Anyone can be mechanical and, the mechanics work, but no, it's more than just mechanics. It was just, it was like, okay, that now I get it. Now that's what it's all about. That's why it's such a big deal. That's why people talk about all the time. That's why people get in trouble, and because they've made a dumb decision, or, that's why people have affairs, or, whatever it is. It's a big deal. I mean, and that's why I finally understood.
Yeah.
So since then, and fast forward to now, I'm, been dating a man for just over 4 years now. And it's the same. It's still a big deal. It's a big part of our relationship, the attraction. And it's not just, you can't even just put it in one little box. I mean, it just filters into all parts of the relationship.
Right.
I don't know how to just
parts of your identity as a woman and as a sexual being.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And and this is, I'm sure, very common in women that are married to gay men. They start to wonder, is it me? Well, maybe it was me. And of course I know that it wasn't me. It was him. It was we were mismatched in that way. And but yeah, your ego takes a hit. And you, even still, I have a hard time initiating because I got my feelings hurt so many times, being turned down. So I still have that scar. Yeah. But yeah, it's funny how, in my marriage, I downplayed the role of sexuality or the role of sexual. Yeah, I downplayed it. I swept it under the rug. I ignored it. And now I understand. And I would, if I had daughters, and even if I were a Mormon, I would probably tell them that they should try it out before they get married. And I mean, I'm sorry, just from my experience, what I went through and the pain of finding out the wrong way. I would, if I had a daughter, I would tell her to make sure you're a match in that way, because it's a big deal.
Right. Well, and it's interesting whether you agree with that statement or not, as far as listeners are concerned. I think that the real point that you're making is that we make such a big deal about premarital sex, like it can ruin your life and it can do all these awful things and it can put you in this place that you're wrong with God. I mean, all these messages that we get about that. And yet we really don't spend a lot of time not understanding how being the wrong match, like you just said, can also have huge implications for a much longer life. For a much
worse. And then there are children involved, and at that point, or it can be children involved.
Right.
Absolutely. It's less painful to just, it's almost like, okay, well, if you do have, if you are a Mormon and you do have premarital sex, then you'll have to go through they make it so public. That's the other thing about the church. If you, come clean, then it's so public. It's like, just, tie me up to the town flogging post and publish what I did in the newspaper, and shame, and you can't take the sacrament, and all that. That would be easier, because it's just for a little while, just for a year. Well, now I've got what the aftermath of the way we did it is much worse. The damage, much worse.
Well, I know I kept you for a long time, and I could keep you for much longer, but why don't you go ahead and finish the story then? How did you and Richard kind of end up navigating these waters? I know you stayed married for many years. Did you try to rekindle your sex life? Did you just decide you were going to get creative? How did you end up navigating this place?
We, as a first step, well, first of all, it was, we tried to, okay, we'll just be celibate. We'll just stay married and we'll be celibate. And then we lived with that for a while. And it was still, it's psychologically really hard to engage with the person that doesn't want you. And so we really couldn't do it. It was just too weird. It was too, my ego couldn't take it. Yeah. I was just, you have to know, part of the fun of sexuality is you have two people that want to do it, right? That want each other, and there's desire and passion, and there was just no desire, no passion, and to not be wanted, and to finally really know that you're not wanted in that way. So it was just it was just too awkward. And so then we thought, okay, we'll just do the celibate marriage. And then that was impossible for Richard. And I was like, I don't care. I am just, this marriage is, we're going to stay married and we're going to raise our kids, and I'll just, fall on the sword for my family, right? And for my marriage. And then I lived for a while with sort of a one-sided open marriage. And that just didn't sit well. And I just didn't feel good. And even for the sake of my family and my kids, and I don't know, I got to a point where that just wasn't working for me. So then we moved into the phase of, okay, we're going to stay married, but double open marriage. We were like, who's going to date either one of us if you don't say that you're going to get divorced, right? Or that you're moving toward divorce. So we decided that we would start talking about the big scary D word, and that this was around the time that, Natasha, that I decided I want more. I think I want more out of life. And that means, I need to get a divorce. And so those two things sort of happened simultaneously. So we started working, that was in 2010. And when that visit that summer, I think it was in the spring, it was like in March. It was March. And because it was cold at the park. And I just remember the date. I think it was March 10th and 2010. And so that right about that time, Richard and I started talking about divorce. And I started communicating to him that I wanted more. I want a full life. I want to have a relationship, and I want to have sex, and let's move toward divorce. We did take our time. We followed our mantra of nothing rash, love, 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 and no fear. So we did a collaborative divorce, where that's the kind of divorce where you each have to have an attorney, but you never really go to court. The only time you go to court is in the end, when you raise your hand and you sit in front of the judge and say, I agree to this. But you work it out with the attorneys. And so we did a collaborative divorce. It took us so long because neither one of us was that. It's just such a pain in the butt getting divorced. And so in September 2013, we got divorced. And on our anniversary of all dates, that was our court date.
Wow.
And we had our picture taken. It wasn't a sad thing. We maintained our great relationship through all that. We never fought about money. We wrote our agreement. We wrote it out. We rewrote it. We edited it. We wrote it, and then we told the attorneys to just put it in legal speak. And they had a few issues with this issue or that issue, but we knew we were just going to manage the divorce anyway. We're not going to adhere to these silly laws that a lot of couples have to because they don't get along. So we got divorced on our 18th anniversary. He came out on our 12th anniversary. 6 years later, we were divorced. We took pictures in front of the courthouse. Richard's attorney took our picture. And he said, well, this is the first time I've taken somebody's picture that just got divorced. And then we looked at each other and we're like, well, what do we do? What do we do now? Like, what do people do when on the day they get divorced? So we were like, the kids were with the babysitter, and we got in the car and we're like, okay, let's go downtown. Let's go have lunch. And then let's go buy stuff that we would never buy. Let's go buy ourselves a divorce present. So, and we went and had this beautiful lunch sitting outside, and it was a beautiful September day. And there's a Bloomingdale's home right across the street, and they have these beautiful Georg Janssen, who's this like Norwegian or Swedish designer that makes these beautiful kitchenware type stuff. And he has these beautiful modern candlesticks that are silver, and they're twisty, and they're not so much twisty as they're crooked. And but they're beautiful. They're I have one very large one and one was slightly smaller, and they sit side by side on my mantle. And they were like $1,000. And I'm like, when would I ever buy that for myself? But on the day that you get divorced, and they sort of they're an emblem of my twisty life, but they're beautiful. And I look at them and I think of how, you don't have to be perfectly proportional or straight or perfectly round or perfectly anything, and you can still have this beautiful. Anyway, they're like this emblem for my life. That it's not. That's how I want to view my life, and that it can be twisty and turny, but it still can be shiny and beautiful. And they're two of my prized possessions, these silly candlesticks. And they're big, big and heavy and metal. And I love them. And that's just how life is sometimes. Not perfect.
Well, that is super profound. I'm sitting here with my hairs all up and end just listening to you, and very emotional. I just love you so much, and
Natasha, I love you too, and you were so instrumental, and you were such a source of strength to me during those were very dark times. I've never felt so alone, so unsupported in my whole life. It was very scary, and I had to draw on every drop in my reservoir to get through that and just get out of bed and take care of my kids. And I just, lots of people go through really hard stuff. And, but in this instance, I just, getting through all that hard stuff, it's so much better on the other side. And I'm proud of my journey, and I have scars and chinks in my armor. But I knew when I was going through all of this that life doesn't have to suck. There's no way that life, even though I have this huge problem that I can't figure out how to fix or get out of, or it took me years and years to figure it out. It doesn't have to suck. And there is happiness, and there are still some dark days, but I have scratched and clawed my way to happiness. And I'm still scratching and clawing. It's just, it's continuous, but those days were dark, and I thought I was going to die. I thought I might die of grief. But there are many people who are in my shoes.
Yeah.
And both on my side and on the other side. And the thing I'd like to just maybe end with is people ask me, how can you not be mad? How come you're not so mad at him? And, that he didn't really tell you more of how he was, why are you not mad? How can you not be mad? And it's because I am mad, but I'm not mad at him. I'm mad at the culture that supports suppressing sexuality, whether it's the Mormon religion or the Catholic religion or a neighborhood or whatever culture it is that suppresses or that shames kids into hiding their sexuality, or young adults or whatever. That's what I'm mad at. And as we know, Mormonism does that. They create this environment where homosexuality is not permitted. You can be homosexual. You can't act on it. I mean, that's ridiculous. It makes no sense. And so, it just from the tiny tot, we learned that, Richard at 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever age he was, knew, without someone even saying the words, knew that he couldn't be who he is. He couldn't express his sexuality in any form. And then, fast forward to my train wreck. And so I'm mad at cultures that keep people down, keep people, in this case, homosexual, transgender, whatever, wherever you are on the spectrum, or whichever letter you are, LGBTQ, ... whatever, wherever you are. I'm mad at the organizations or cultures that suppress that right for every person to express who they are and be who they are and sleep who they want to, or sleep with whom they want. That's what I'm mad at. And so I struggle with, there's many things I love about the Mormon Church, but I am mad that, and it persists. Richard has a partner now and can't bring his partner to the family events because, well, what would we tell how would we explain it to the children that we condone this behavior, yet our prophet tells us that we have to disavow our brothers and sisters that are homosexual or live homosexual lifestyles. So how do we explain it to the children? It fires me up every time. My hair lights right on fire every time I hear it. And so that's what I'm mad at.
Yeah, I'm with you, sister, for sure.
I know. Yeah.
I
want to stomp my foot and say, well, what about my children? What do I tell my children? What about my children?
I think one of the most powerful things you ever told me was what you said earlier, which is, and it was one of those moments where you just looked me straight in the face and you said, the church is no longer relevant for me and my family because there's no space.
Yeah.
That was so sad for me to realize how true words you were speaking to me in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And that was because people have to understand too, when you're listening to this, that Melissa and I were talking about these things and talking together at times when the nation wasn't even talking about gay marriage or any of those things. Obama still said, this was before Obama was saying things like, I support straight marriage. Even Obama has started off with that. And so we were, and even the training, like the mental health training that I received, I would imagine it's much better now. I would imagine it's much more inclusive of LGBTQ issues. But at the time that I was going through master's degree programs, it was barely mentioned. It was barely something that was brought up.
Mm-hmm.
So we've come a long way, baby.
Yes, but we're just barely, I can't even believe that we're not further along as a culture.
And I
really can't.
Absolutely. And the facts.
But I also think unless you live with it in a very intimate way, like I do, and where it has big repercussions on your life or your job or you don't have to think about it all the time. And so nothing needs to be done today about it, but for others, it's more of an immediate need. But I think for the majority, it's not an immediate need.
Yeah.
Because the majority is not gay.
Right. Yes.
Wow.
And I think too, this is where, and I've spoken about this before, I started out with a lot of misperceptions and biases and religious kind of privilege, around some of these issues. And yet it was listening to people like you and Richard and the love I had for you and my friendships with you, and then many, many clients in similar situations over the years, that I don't even see it as it changed my mind. It forced me to have to look at it differently. It forced me to be able to say, this is obviously not working. And that's why it's so hard to give a pass to, especially the top leadership in our church, because I know that they too, and not maybe in a professional way, like as a therapist, but in a ministering way, which I would think is even worse, have sat with so many of these stories. And it just doesn't make any sense to me that same forcing of the issue hasn't come to pass.
Yeah, I agree. I do not believe in any way that God, Jesus Christ, who is, if he's really running the church, I do not believe that he is telling the church leaders, let's say it's true that they speak with God in the temple, right? I do not believe that we have the same God. There's no way that God is telling them that children of gay parents have to disavow their parents to keep their membership in the church. Or maybe I have that policy off a little bit, but it's along those lines.
No,
I do not believe that God, the God that I believe in, said that to anyone. I just don't believe that. It makes no sense that 10% or 8% or 12%, whatever the percentage is of the population, is not legitimate in God's eyes. I just do not believe that. And that they shouldn't have the same rights as we do, i.e. marriage in the church, in God's eyes, sanctioned by God. I just do not believe that God believes that. It makes no sense to me.
Well, I hope that the audience has enjoyed a chat between two old friends. You've borne
Speak for yourself. Speak for yourself. I'm not all. Tasha is younger than I am, I'll admit. She's younger and more beautiful.
Oh my goodness, not at all. So I just am so thrilled that you accepted my invitation, Melissa. Really, I think this is such an important story to tell. I've known it's an important story to tell. I know we didn't have time today to talk about it much, but you called me right after watching Believer, the documentary, and I know that was a moving thing for you, and kind of, I think you shared with me that was part of your decision in speaking up today with me and sharing some of your story, is wanting to be an advocate for others who are in similar situations like you. So
yes, I have so much admiration for, I don't know his name, but the band leader of, the head guy of Imagine Dragons. I don't know his name, but I watched the documentary, and I was so inspired by he didn't really have it was his wife's best friends that couldn't come to their wedding, or that wouldn't come to their wedding because they're lesbians, and how he really took that issue to heart. He really doesn't have a family member that's gay, or at least that he knew of. I mean, everyone's got a family member that's gay, right? But you just don't know it yet. But I loved what he said about that we all have this, we hide behind this luxury of, we don't have to deal with it because it's not right in our face. It's not under our roof. It's not in our bedroom. It's not in our, you know what I mean? So we have the luxury of not having to address it. But we do, because people are depressed and killing themselves, or, or for whatever or don't feel safe, or they're being teased or abused, or, you know, for whatever. I just was so inspired by that. And I just, was inspired to, okay, I called you that night after I was watching it and said, I want to speak, because it did affect me in a very personal way. It affects my children, and it affects all, you know, very many people, and they should hear about it.
I agree.
And everyone should speak out until these silly policies are changed.
I agree. Well, thank you, Melissa, for your time today. I hope that
Thank you, Natasha.
This interview, if you have, please consider a donation. I think, again, like, these interviews are so important to help other people in similar situations not feel so alone. One of the things that Melissa talked about, which I think is so prominent, is the isolation when people feel alone, and sometimes they don't know where to go for help, and they can't reach out to people. And so having a podcast or something that you can listen to or download is oftentimes the only resource people can access at a particularly given time. And so I really appreciate those who donate towards this cause. And Melissa, please give a hug and a kiss to all your people that I love so much. And
I will. You do as well.
Okay, we have to get together soon.
Okay. Yes, we do. We do.
Take care.
All right, Natasha. You too. Bye-bye.
We took the long road home, turned minutes into miles. And as the evening traveled on, the sunset bathed your smile. We stopped beneath the desert stars, wrapped in each other's arms. Was as simple as I love you, an ordinary, extraordinary truth.
A trail with tears, pain and sorrow too.
But through every storm we traveled on, like lovers do. And if sometimes we fell apart, we always came back home. Was as simple as I love you, an ordinary, extraordinary truth. Some people say love is blind and forever is too long. But I see your eyes in every sunrise. Can't imagine life alone. Let's take the long road on together until we're gone. Want you by my side till the day I die and into the beyond. It's as simple as our love is. That's how I wanna go. All wrapped up in the arms of our extraordinary. It's nothing ordinary love. Ordinary. No, it's extraordinary.